Hello everyone, and welcome to the 239th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Zach Cregger's Weapons. Critics were raving about this film before it was released, and sometimes that's an indicator that a film is going to be amazing, but sometimes it isn't. Well, in this case, the critics definitely had the right of it. Coming off the backs of Barbarian and Companion, two other great films by Zach Cregger that also deserve their own episodes in this series, Weapons is a great example of the growing trend of horror films steadily becoming some of the greatest releases in any given year. And in this video, we're going to sift through all the clues and details we're given here to see if we can't unravel a bit of the mystery surrounding all the evil present in this film. But before we get to that, we need to take a moment to talk about some other weapons you can find in our sponsor for this video, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and it's available now for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. Grab your controller or your mouse and take command of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations, hopping into the seat of anything from the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. You don't get to just pilot these vehicles though, because War Thunder offers in-depth customization for all their vehicles, with countless things to tinker with like camouflages, historical markings, and decorations, including community-created ones. But no military combat simulator would be complete without, well, combat. So once you get your craft decked out the way you want, jump right into the action and witness incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects that place you right at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time. And to make things even better, War Thunder has an X-ray view feature, where you'll see precisely where a shell penetrates a vehicle, which components were affected, and what ultimately led to the destruction of the vehicle, when either you or your enemy's vehicle is destroyed. So if you want to experience one of the greatest military combat games out there, be sure to click my links in the description to join a worldwide community of over 95 million players in epic PvP battles on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile today, and delve into the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. And with War Thunder now offering their new mobile version available on iOS and Android, you can take all this action-packed fun wherever you go, and with an unmatched wealth of high-quality content to discover, there's simply no game better suited for fans of military history. As an added bonus, new and returning players on PC and console that haven't played in the last 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account access. But it'll only be available for a limited time, so click either of my links in the description to download War Thunder today and get right into the action with all these bonuses. Thank you War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Now without further ado, let's begin. One of the hardest things that all of us have to deal with at some point in our lives is the loss of a loved one. And while losing anyone you love is a horrendous thing to experience, the loss of one's child is perhaps the most horrendous of them all. For if you ask any loving parent, they'll tell you that there's nothing more terrifying than the thought of losing their child. And while all the ways in which you could lose your child are horrific, losing them without knowing how or why you lost them is without a doubt the worst. Knowing that your child has had their life taken from them is no easy thing to deal with. But at the very least, when such a thing happens, you're allowed some amount of closure. Closure that's liable to break you in many different ways, but closure nonetheless. When their fate is left to the unknown though, your grief is amplified tenfold as your mind constantly runs through hundreds of heart-wrenching possibilities, as you're reminded day after day that somewhere out there, your pride and joy has either lost their life, or is currently suffering tortures that you fear to imagine, which only casts you further down into the pit of despair and madness that their absence has thrown you into. As for the people who inflict this type of torment on the most innocent among us, well, they're rightfully reviled as some of the worst monstrosities mankind has to offer, for there isn't even a shred of justification for their acts of evil. For how can you justify the harm or murder of children? You can't. And in this story, we're exposed to a woman whose actions are so thoroughly unjustifiable and repugnant that they elevate her status as a villain to the next level. The story of Weapons begins by explaining to us that almost an entire classroom of 3rd grade students all suddenly got out of their beds at the same time at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night and ran off into the unknown. For over a month, the parents of these children were forced to wallow in despair as they clamored for any explanation for their children's disappearance or their whereabouts, many of whom chose to point to their children's teacher, Justine Gandy, as the culprit responsible for their veritable abduction. The only logical person to place all the blame on, considering that all the children who disappeared were her students. It's not until we get a little over halfway through this film that we discover the truth, that not a single person native to this town had a willing hand in the abduction of these children. No, that honor goes to a mysterious woman named Glattis. Out of all the children that were stolen from their homes, there was only one from Miss Gandy's class who seemingly remained untouched, a boy named Alex Lilly. The Lilly family seemed to be as average a middle-class family as any other, and they were, a family of 3 consisting of a loving mother and father who were raising and caring for their son in a small-town suburban setting. Unfortunately for this happy family though, Mrs. Lily's family counted amongst its ranks a woman that she referred to as her Aunt Glattis, a woman who didn't attend her wedding and who she hasn't seen in over 15 years. Mr. Lily states to Alex that he doesn't know much about her, and that he's not sure that his wife does either, but she's sick, and family has to help each other out. So when Aunt Glattis came calling, the Lily family answered, and we're first properly introduced to Glattis when she attends a meeting with Alex's principal in his parents' stead, and it's here that we're given a picture of quite the eccentric woman. An elderly lady sporting a brightly colored orange wig, large thickly rimmed glasses, heavily painted on lipstick, and a patchwork of technicolor clothing and gaudy jewelry. Glattis looks like she put together her persona by purchasing some of the worst pieces of clothing and accoutrements a 1970s department store would offer. And while she does wear a few different outfits throughout the film, they all have a similarly dated look to them. Eccentric and antiquated clothing aside, it's not the oddity that Glattis appears to be that's the problem. It's the oddity that she actually is on the inside. As I mentioned earlier, we eventually learn that Glattis is the one who's abducted all the children in this town, but that wasn't always her intention. The day after Glattis arrived at the Lily household, she put a spell over Alex's parents using what we can only assume is witchcraft by combining personal effects such as hair with strange, black thorny branches that I've seen people say either come from a blackthorn tree or a holly tree, either of which have been traditionally used in witchcraft. And her intended goal here seems to have been draining the life force from Alex's parents to keep herself from succumbing to some unknown illness, as at one point, Glattis tells Alex that she's very sick and she was hoping his parents would help her get better. But because they weren't, that's when she decided to target Alex's class. So clearly Glattis is doing what she does in this story to keep death at bay. But we're given several indicators that show us that she's not just trying to cure some sort of sickness, but that she's attempting to prolong a life that's already gone on well past its expiration date. What would you do if you discovered a way to prolong your life? Would you immediately jump at the chance to do so, or would you hesitate? It's an interesting question, as such an opportunity would cause any one of us to pause for a moment. But a greater question that we need to ask ourselves here is, would you even consider it if you learned that to do so would cause harm to others? As much as I'm sure most of you answered of course not when I first said that, I'd be willing to bet that if you were actually in a position to answer such a question for real, you would, much to your own shame, hesitate for a few moments before coming to a decision, which would only be natural. Now you might be asking, why would it be natural? Because there is only one thing in this world that we cannot escape no matter how hard we try, and that's death. No matter how many precautions you take, no matter how healthily you live, no matter how much money you acquire, sooner or later, the Reaper comes for us all. An ever-present threat that we're able to ignore for the most part on a day-to-day basis, but a threat that's always there, nonetheless. So if someone were to offer you a way to keep that threat at bay, even if it meant bringing harm to others, I believe that most of us would indeed take a moment to decide whether or not we'd do it. And well, if your answer turned out to be yes you would, then you'd forever mark yourself as an evil person. Because taking the life of others so you can prolong your own can in no way be seen as a good thing for anyone except yourself. And at some point in her life, Glattis was given such an opportunity and took it. Now how do we know that? Well, we're only really given one indicator in this film that points to this idea, but it is one hell of an indicator. When Glattis is speaking with Alex's principal, she mentions that she's there in place of his parents because his parents are sick with a bit of consumption, something that causes Marcus to pause and say he doesn't know what that is, and that he thought it was something settlers got on the Oregon Trail, a statement that Glattis laughs off and provides no further context to. Now, consumption is an antiquated term for tuberculosis, and while I suppose it is possible that someone in this day and age would refer to it as consumption, that's unlikely, as after Robert Koch discovered the bacteria that caused the disease in 1882, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, people gradually started to refer to consumption as tuberculosis. So while it's possible that Glattis was born in the early 20th century and is somewhere around 110 to 120 years old, and she grew accustomed to a term she heard when she was a child, that seems unlikely, as finding people using outdated terms typically only happens when you encounter someone who used that term for a good majority of their life. Now, if it weren't for another subtle string of details we receive in this story, I might be inclined to say that she really is just over 100 years old. But when you're analyzing something, it pays to pay attention to the little details to see whether or not there's something more beneath the surface in any given story, especially if you can establish a pattern with those details. 2 times in this film, parasites are mentioned, once in Miss Gandy's class, and another when we see Marcus and Terry watching a documentary on the cordyceps fungi. the mushroom that infects various insects, takes control of their bodies, and uses them like puppets to spread their spores to other creatures. Why parasites being mentioned twice is no coincidence is because that's essentially what Glattis is. A parasite who latches onto her hosts and feeds on their life force to give her life in turn. But how does that support the idea that she's been alive for perhaps hundreds of years? Well, something interesting about horror scenarios like these is that we have no real way of knowing that this Aunt Glattis actually was Mrs. Lily's aunt. But do we have any reason to suspect otherwise? I think we do. The fact that Glattis is described as being what is essentially a stranger to the Lillys, as well as the idea that she's a parasite, causes me to wonder whether or not she's really a part of their family, or a person who's made herself a part of their family. Making herself appear as a distant relative only makes this notion more plausible, as her obscure position in the family wouldn't really raise any eyebrows when she's mostly absent, like she was from the Lillys' wedding, which would be the perfect cover to allow her to lurk in the shadows and do what she needed to do to infiltrate various families. So perhaps Glattis has been alive for centuries, moving from family to family, sucking the life force from them whenever her life force started to fade. Something that could have also potentially rejuvenated her physical appearance, which would have allowed her various avenues to take in pursuing her next invasion into a family's home. As is made evident by the events of this film though, it would appear that Glattis' method of extending her life wasn't as reliable as it once was, as she was forced to have Alex help her kidnap his classmates in order to stave off death this time around, which was likely a significant deviation from her usual plan of simply infiltrating a family's home undetected and leaving much the same way she came, leaving their friends, other family members, and communities none the wiser. This is what would end up being her downfall, overstepping and exposing herself to far more people than she typically did by attempting to stall the investigation into the children's disappearance until she could properly absorb their vitality. And as much as she tried, eventually, Glattis failed, as evil is always doomed to in the end, and she appropriately met her demise at the hands of the children whose lives she nearly stole away. Though Glattis did indeed meet her end, it would seem that her influence continued to live on long after her demise, for evil rarely, if ever, dies with the ones who sowed it. It is a lingering thing, one that can be felt in the painful memories that are elicited by scars both physical and mental, and especially in the absence of those that have been lost to it. And Glattis is surely responsible for not just many, many deaths over the course of her long life, but also the destruction of those left living to tell the tale, like the children we see in this story who had pieces stolen from them that may never return. Now, as I said towards the beginning of this video, there are a few evildoers in this world that are more loathsome than those who target children, but I'd argue that even amongst child murderers, Glattis can be labeled as one of the worst offenders that an individual can possibly be. For certain types of offenders of her caliber, you can at least point to certain aspects of their life that lets you know where they went wrong, how the trauma and abuse that they suffered caused them to reflect what they experienced back onto others. That doesn't make what they do any less abhorrent, nor is it an excuse, but it is at the very least an explanation as to why they did what they did. People like Glattis, though, there is no explanation for their crimes other than the fact that they are so completely selfish and morally broken that they would consider harming the most innocent among us for their own nefarious gain. Not to mention that she harmed several other people along the way in order to ensure her plan would be fully realized. But really, after taking that first step towards prolonging her life, is it so unexpected that this woman would make herself into a monster? After all, life is a beautiful thing, and to partake in the poison that extends such beauty must only become more addictive the longer you imbibe it. A desire to live longer that eventually becomes an insatiable lust for life at any cost, and a fear of death so prolonged that one is driven to do anything necessary to keep it at bay. No, it's not surprising that Glattis became the beast she was, but it is not something that can be excused, making her a monster in the truest sense of the word, and a character that I feel comfortable stating is pure evil. Now, Glattis is obviously the central evil in this story, but as with many films, there's an overarching theme of evil that's woven throughout nearly all the different dynamics we see playing out between the different characters in this story. The idea that an invader in one's home can shatter an individual, a family, or a relationship into pieces. But aside from Glattis invading the Lily household and tearing children from their homes, who or what else can we say did the same? Well, let's take a listen to what Zach Cregger himself said about what weapons means to him in an interview over on the channel The Witch.
Again, without spoiling, what do you think Weapons is tapping into?
I don't think it's about, to me, Weapons is not an examination of societal malfunction. To me, it's more about my own personal stuff. Like the final chapter of this movie is very autobiographical. It's about, and this is not a spoiler, but it's examining the dynamic of children with parents who are alcoholics, which is my childhood, and the idea of a foreign entity entering a household and inverting the dynamic between a child and the parents, the child feeding the parents soup and, being the caretaker and that sort of a thing. So, that it's much more about my own autobiographical stuff than looking outward. It's a looking inward movie.
Addiction is a hell of a thing. It doesn't just destroy the life of the addict, but the lives of everyone around them. And indeed, it is like a foreign entity entering a home that replaces any and all normalcy that may have lived there before. We can see this with Justine's story and with her past DUIs, a crippling addiction to alcohol that has given her some heavy baggage to carry with her wherever she goes, and a terrible crutch to fall back on whenever she's in distress that's liable to destroy her life even further. Paul, who relapses due to Justine's influence, had his life taken from him as it spiraled out of control both at home and professionally. James, the homeless drug addict we run into frequently in this story, met a similar fate, with his addictions already leaving his life in the gutter and then sending it into oblivion as he continued to make poor decision after poor decision. And yes, as a metaphor for alcoholism invading a family's home and destroying what it means to be a family, Glattis and the dire situation she put the Lilly family in is as fantastic as it is tragic. And no matter who you are or where you're from, I think we can all agree that addiction is an evil that only breeds more evil, and one that this world would be much better off without. Though that was Zach Cregger's vision for this story, and a vision that he executed well at that, he also had this to say in an interview over on Jake's Takes.
So then I want to go to the opposite end of the spectrum, because for you answer this question and it's brilliant, but there's a lot of stuff that I would argue is left unanswered. There are a lot of questions that I walked away going, I can't even reveal what the question is, but things that I was left wondering more about.
Is it like the thing in the sky?
Thing in the sky, or even the family relationship to an aunt that comes along. How do you decide what's enough? Like I've given you enough. I don't want to because I'm a big believer that to explain too much can ruin things.
It lances the fear.
Yeah.
I think it's better to let people have their own interpretations of these things, and I don't know, it makes it a more personal experience as a viewer, I think, if you have to kind of plug some gaps.
Yep.
And your version of the movie is going to be different than your wife's version of the movie, and I think that's fun. When I watch a David Lynch film, it's all unanswered questions, and that's why I'm so drawn to it. I'll watch Mulholland Drive 100 times because every time I watch it, I have a different idea of what I'm
see it 100 different movies
is going. Yeah, exactly. And so that's great. Why would I have to stitch everything up? It would ruin it.
I greatly appreciate this sentiment, because it's not uncommon for all of us to walk away from a film having interpreted in ways that its creators may not have intended. And I think that each set of eyes or ears consuming a given piece of media, coming away with something different, or adding things to it that others may not have even thought about, is a beautiful thing. When I first saw Weapons, I came away thinking that the film was commenting on just how fragile our communities can be when tragedy strikes, and how easy it is for just one person to upend an entire town without anyone even noticing until it's too late. But I'm interested to know what you came out of the theater with after you'd watched this incredible film. So please let us all know down below, and of course, let us all know what you think of the dreaded evil that can be found in this story as well. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you enjoyed. A special thank you to War Thunder as well for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to download it for free on your PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile device to start having fun with War Thunder and receive some amazing bonuses for new and returning players who haven't played in the last 6 months across PC and consoles today. Now, what are your thoughts on Weapons? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community. and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.